just a child and just dealing with your peers and not wanting to be viewed as different. But the
Right.
fact was, in mid 70s California, I was different. I didn't look like everyone else. So that was at that time something I struggled with. But as I grew into myself and my own identity, I used those experiences to share through song or through whether I was writing for a zine or doing an interview. I used that experience to hopefully share with other kids that look like me, that maybe are dealing with the similar issues, that they're not alone.
Hey, everybody, welcome. My name is Lisa Hollenbach. I'm the Senior Digital Manager with EdPost, and I'm very excited to be here today with a very special guest, Mike Park, who is a Korean American musician and progressive activist. He is the owner of Asian Men Records and was once the frontman and saxophone player for a group called Skankin Pickle. And I have to tell you, Mike, that you have some big fans on our team who are very excited about this interview today, kind of living out our early punk dreams by having you here talking with us today. So welcome. And I'd like to open it up to you first to just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your story.
Oh, yeah. Thank you, first of all, for having me. I appreciate it. The story starts, I guess, in high school, just growing up in the affluent suburb of San Jose, California, where I was one of six Asian males to graduate from my high school class. I found an escape through punk rock, and that led me to kind of seeing the politics through music, and in particular, the band 7 Seconds and the band Fishbone. 7 Seconds with the music and the message, Fishbone with both the music and message and the idea of six people of color playing a style that wasn't stereotypically Black.
Right.
I mean, and we could say even present day, it continues to be a music that is predominantly white, and that's just the facts. So being able to find that in my youth, that music, punk and ska, underground music, let's say, and just kind of running with it. And obviously, it wasn't a fad, as I am now, 40 years after the fact, still very much involved in DIY and the philosophy of punk. And it's something I am very passionate about, and not just the music, but the politics behind it.
Yes. So that started very early. And I love to hear that. And even some of my master's work was on the politics behind music and how it can push people to make change and motivate them to get involved and get active. So, punk is really a great genre for that. I use several punk songs in that work that I did. So, yeah, it's great to see you started out so early. And then you talked a little bit about when you wrote for us last year, you talked a little bit about your own experience growing up and some of the racism that you encountered. Is that something that led you to the activism path and to put that into your music?
I think so. At the time, obviously not. I was peers and not wanting to be viewed as different. But the
Right.
fact was, in mid 70s California, I was different. I didn't look like everyone else. So that was at that time something I struggled with. But as I grew into myself and my own identity, I used those experiences to share through song or through whether I was writing for a zine or doing an interview. I used that experience to hopefully share with other kids that look like me, that maybe are dealing with the similar issues, that they're not alone. And I've definitely come back to that through song many times, those experiences early in life and how it affected me negatively and how it affects me positively these days.
Right, right. And you were able to overcome a lot of what you experienced and channel that into music and expression and to be kind of a beacon for other kids that maybe that need to know that they're not by themselves, that other people are experiencing this, they're not alone. And then I set that on one side and I look at the experience that you talk about in the article at one of your shows in 1994 when you were on tour. And it strikes me that those two things are related, the mindset that you take to channel the hurt that you experienced and also the ability to kind of step outside of that and help somebody else even though others may not have wanted to help that person in that space. Would you talk a little bit about that and what you were thinking about when you encountered the incident at your show?
So we're talking about a concert in Tampa, Florida. It was, if you can visualize, maybe a 500 capacity room, very sweaty, very energetic, stage diving, mosh pit. So that's of young people and, white, predominantly white, everyone having a good time. And off to kind of my peripheral vision, I could see my bandmate yelling at somebody. And I see a gentleman in the front just giving me a Sig Heil salute. And he's yelling something at me, and it's slope. He's yelling slope. And then you could see the crowd pick up on this and the anger. So you have this mob mentality of, okay, we're gonna mess this guy up. And I could see this thing starting to escalate. And so I jumped in and pulled him out and took him out to threw him out in the back exit. And I could still see his eyes, like that anger turning into fear and just like a confusion. And I'd always gosh, whatever happened to that guy? What are they thinking now? Did those events change their perception of me? And just confusion of anytime someone can hate somebody based on their differences, whether it's race, sexuality, religion, it never made sense to me. And so, especially as a young child, just being raised in a way that was instilled in my mind that we're all equals. And so having that instilled as a youngster, and then experiencing racism firsthand, especially when you always deal with subliminal fascism in one way or another in life. But to get out of the bubble of California, of that diversity, and seeing it when I traversed across the United States and going to the South for the first time, that was the real eye opener of having people look at me differently when I was going into a convenience store or into a restaurant. And it was a real eye opener for me.
Right. Absolutely. And as you look back, what things do you think have changed for the better since maybe your teen or your early adulthood to today? Do you think that we've made progress?
I'd like to be optimistic that we have, but I think there's always, racism just exists. Hatred exists. The thing that's different in 2023, I believe, the accessibility to see that hatred instantly. If someone has, and I would say everyone has a smartphone, you pull it out and you can see people at their worst at any time, 24 hours a day. Whether that is an indication that we have regressed, I am quick to say I don't agree with that. I just believe the accessibility to see that hatred is more readily available. I do think we have made steps in the right direction, but we have a long way to go. And that's just the facts. That's, if you're hiding behind a bubble that everything is okay, then you're living a fairy tale.
Right. Right.
In a fairy tale.
Definitely. And things have become pretty intense in the past couple of years. One of the things our kids are battling, AAPI kids are battling in schools today, is the myth and stereotype of the model minority. And from your perspective, you went a very different route. And so what would you say to kids today who are trying to live up to this idealized stereotype of what it is to be Asian in the world, in school? And what advice would you have for kids?
Well, what you're talking about is very indicative of the parental stress that Asian Americans deal with. You are groomed at a young age to be successful, to be a doctor, a lawyer, an engineer, to go to Harvard, Yale, Stanford, Berkeley, MIT. This is what you are groomed to do from the day you're born. And the hypocrisy is they also groom you to be excellent in the arts, whether it's piano. I wouldn't say every, that's a bad assumption, but a majority of Asian kids are forced to do some kind of instrument, whether it's piano or violin. And let's say that kid falls in love with that instrument that their parent has forced upon them and have forced them to practice. And if they fall in love with that instrument and decide, I'd like to do this for a living, that's when the parental support is gone because it's viewed as only as a hobby. It's not a real job. So kids who are in the arts, whether it be as an illustrator, as a graffiti artist, as a poet, as an actor, very rarely do you have support from your parents, especially old school. If you're an old, coming from an old school generation, first generation, I would say I'm making up these figures. I'd say 95% of the time your parents aren't supporting your decision to choose a profession that's not quote unquote guaranteed.
How did your parents feel about a ska band early on?
No support.
None.
No support. My mom cried weekly. I would see her cry, just saying, you need to go back to school and get a real job. It wasn't until somehow Korean media picked up on my story and I was featured in some like Korean newspapers and on TV and at least with the Korean American parents, they like to brag about their kids. So that was the first time where they were like getting phone calls from their friends saying, we saw your son on TV or read about them. And then somehow it was deemed okay. But
Right.
really, it wasn't until I was able to make money. And that's a sad fact and reality of it. If I was still doing this, but just struggling, my mom would still be crying. And it was only until I was able to make a living doing this that it was truly accepted.
Right. Right. And that's a tough road sometimes for an artist. So long road.
A long road. I know so many people who just love music and that's all they want to do, but it's not obtainable. It's not an easy path to pay the bills.
Absolutely. So switching back over to last few years in the news, one figure that you mentioned in your article was, as of last year, there was a 339% increase in hate crimes against Asian Americans. And in the space of time between 2000 and 2022, there were 11,000 reported incidents of anti-Asian American violence. And that is what they consider to be an underreporting, since so many individuals in the Asian American community are less likely to report a crime. So we have seen an explosive increase, whether it be from COVID and the men in power coining this, the China virus, whether it be from more recent incidents, the shooting in Atlanta or the spy balloon, or now even TikTok and the pushback against TikTok. All of these incidents and others scattered in between there are creating this explosion in this violence. And I'm wondering, in the past year, when we came together last year for you to talk a little bit about what we were seeing and the environment of danger and violence this is creating in communities, has anything changed in the past year? Has it gotten better? Has it gotten worse? Or maybe a little bit of both?
I think it's gotten worse. And that might be in part because I follow a lot of accounts that report violence against Asian Americans. So I might have a clouded vision of the severity, especially living in the Bay Area, where the San Francisco Bay Area in particular, it's been out of control. And so I don't see a lot of advancement in terms of the violence. I do feel there are activists who are banding together to educate and prevent, instead of blaming, pointing fingers, trying to educate why this is happening and how, through simple conversation, person to person, how that can heal some wounds. It's a lot of reactionary ideas are being poured out there on socials. And that's the problem. Violence is not a solution in my mind. And when people are actively talking about retaliatory methods, it's just going to add to more violence. And so it has me worried, but I don't have the solution. I just know that all I can do is to keep myself aware and keep talking about it and hope that people who have a different idea than me or are scared of me or blame me for their position in life, that I can talk to them and share my experience, and maybe our differences will be, if not figured out, at least come to some middle ground where we can accept each other for who we are.
Right. Right. So overall, when you have that visibility into what's probably underreported, we were looking at some statistics that talked about Asian American men, more elderly. Asian American folks are less likely to report crimes. A lot of that is about fear. When you have a better visual into that, it looks even worse. And that's disappointing. I would have hoped that after coronavirus had settled down, that we would have seen the same thing happen in this space. One particular area we're focused on, laser focused on, is education and youth. And some of the studies suggest that feeling that your identity is unsupported or unwelcome or unencouraged can really truly impact the mental health, especially among young kids. And then if we also at the same time look at the fact that suicide is a leading cause of death for Asian Americans aged 15 to 24, those things coming together. One of the studies says a lot of kids aren't especially proud to be Asian American, or at least they wouldn't express pride. They, like you as a young person, wanted to be just like everybody else, wanted to fit in, didn't want to look different. And so celebrating who they are or not being able to celebrate who they are is especially painful for kids when they're growing up. And having that lack of a safe, supportive place, lack of belongingness or feeling unwelcomed can lead to a lonely existence for a lot of people. So we can see how that trajectory leads to some tragedy sometimes. So when we're looking at our young people, our teens, and I suppose I'll step back here a minute. I know you have two teens. Have you seen this impact your own children?
Not as in terms of violence or mental health stability as a person of color, because they're both Hapa or mixed, they can pass for, I think most people think they're Hispanic, to be honest, but they don't have that same identity problem that I have. But they are aware of it because I'm so vocal about it. They, in their bubble as young kids, what I see is totally different from what I experienced. I see them just more dealing with the fentanyl crisis of young people and of the bullying, cyberbullying of TikTok or Snapchat, or things that I can't relate to because of my age, but I'm trying to be coherent to their issues or it's just bullying. That's what I find from them. So, but as the identifying as an Asian American, they don't have the same experience that I do.
Right. And when you think back, do you think that when you look at your peers, Asian American peers, do you think that is a fair assessment of how many of your peers felt in the same time you were growing up too?
100%. It was a very strange connection we had with the six graduating Asian American males, at least. We even started a band. Five of the six were in a band together. It was YWCA. The acronym was Yellows with Chink Attitude. And we were kind of playing off the NWA acronym. And we were kind of just like, let's embrace our identity. And we were a band, and that led to, after the fact of high school, I was in a band called the Chinkies, which is a very overtly political band with Asian American members, just discussing things that we experienced in our youth and something that we could relate to as a unit. But that was, yeah, in high school, particularly, it was very strange that we somehow in our freshman year, five of the six also were in the same PE class, which there's different periods. I don't know how we all got in the same period, but stereotypically, you think like Asian Americans aren't great athletes, but the five of us, two of us were great athletes, and that was myself and one other. And so that they wouldn't get picked last, I'd always pick them first. So we were always on the same team. And we had each other's backs because there's so very few of us.
Nice. Oh, that's fun.
But almost comical to a degree. Like that band, we would use humor to soothe the situation. The hurt that we had, we definitely used humor to kind of get us through it.
That's a common coping mechanism, right? It's, when people are hurting and people are trying to cope, humor is one that I see commonly, and it's effective to be able to lessen the load that you're carrying and lighten the environment a little bit around something that's really very serious. Are you
Most definitely.
are you seeing anything in the Bay Area with the youth that may be in your communities or kids that you might work with or around that would, cause some alarm right now?
Not that I'm directly involved with, just through exterior things that I read that's happening in the greater Bay Area, but not directly in our school district. There have been, I feel, a majority of support against the AAPI hate, and the rallies that I've attended have only confirmed that in my mind that there are more of us than are against us. And so that solidarity, and especially when you go and there's a diverse potluck of just cultures getting together to support each other, that's something that makes me feel good. I hate the fact that it has to happen. I hate that we have to have rallies to voice the concerns and to get the press involved. That's something that shouldn't have to happen.
Right, right. There's a long, rich history of that cross-cultural collaboration between African American movements and Asian American movements over time. And it's nice to see now that the diversity of our movements is broadening, and there's more and more people showing up to stand up for people. And that's fantastic to hear. And as you're there, I'm wondering, are you seeing a lot of young people? Are you seeing our Gen Zers out there doing the work?
There are, yeah, there are not nearly enough. And that's worrisome because I feel like if young people are apathetic to the cause, we're doomed. So it's always been my mission to have young people involved. And I've always used music as the main ingredient to bring in these kids. And it's hard now as I'm older, going to be 54 this year. I've always been able to generate young people. Like they always flock to me. But for the last like 5 years, I just don't have that appeal. The young people aren't so excited to hang out with me anymore, which is, I get it. I get it. But that's why I'm hoping for that next generation to prepare them, keep carrying that torch and really working with young people and get them involved. Because if apathy takes over, it's the death of everybody.
Right. Absolutely. So, as an expert in the music field, how do you think we can use music to move kids to stay involved and to stay informed and to keep fighting?
Well, there just has to be the top tier musicians need to give a shit. The problem is, I hate stereotyping stuff that I'm not familiar with, but I don't, and I'm not full versed on like a lot of the mumble rap stuff. But my kids listen to it. And I listen to the lyrics, and I don't understand it, and I feel like that's me being like the old man shaking his fist at the clouds. But in hip hop is historically political. If you go back to everyone from KRS-One to Public Enemy to NWA, I feel like gosh, there's so much more than
Absolutely.
this glamorization of sex, drugs, rock and roll. And then especially in punk rock, everything I listened to was about the idea of an alternate version of what was deemed normal. And so music was an educational tool for me to learn about things that I didn't learn about in school. Public Enemy was more useful for my education than high school ever was.
Right. Right. One thing I found when I was studying about music in popular movements is that I questioned why it was that music seemed to be a little bit more effective in the past at moving people to action or motivating people to get involved. And I looked at the importance of music, Vietnam era, civil rights era, and all of these different spaces. And I looked around at the time I was doing the study and thought, where is the music? And I went on a hunt for where the music was, and I found it all in indie, punk, ska. Like most of it was there. And then the problem I found was that it wasn't coming through on the radio stations the same way that we hear pop music coming through. So kids don't really have access to the type of music that might motivate them, that might light a fire under them to do something. They have to go out and seek it out themselves.
Exactly. But if you think about historically, like if you're going back to like the movement of like the Bob Dylans and then going to the movement of the Clash or then the Dead Kennedys in punk or even in mainstream, like the Beastie Boys or Rage Against the Machine, these bands were overtly political, especially like a band like Rage Against the Machine. They had such and continue to have such a big audience, but that audience is now older. So it's going to take a new band, a next generational talent who are political and are not afraid to alienate 35% of the population in the United States or offend them and get their message across. That's what I really feel music. I mean, an artist like Bruce Springsteen is still very relevant, but that audience is older. Bruce Springsteen is not, I mean, to some kids that are teenagers, but Springsteen is not relevant to teenagers. And that's just fact.
Right.
So we need like a Taylor Swift type of artist who's just like, this is how it is. Like, and I feel like it's happening to some degree with like a Lizzo, very like a positive role model. But I want that male dominated artist to like really stand up and say, this is wrong and this is why. You don't grab someone by the pussy and this is why. And where young men will take that and go, oh, okay, I get it. Right. Music is so powerful, whether you realize it or not. It's used in every capacity, whether you're in the department store, whether you're at a sporting event, whether you are watching TV or a movie. Everything dictates the mood through music.
Absolutely.
Whether you realize it or not. And so why not use this great gift to better us as not just like the United States, but as a human race? Like we're dealing with something so much bigger. The world is on fire. And if you look at it like that, there's not a lot of optimism. But if you don't have hope, what's there to live for? So you have to have hope.
Right. Right. And that, that makes me think back to your original piece that you wrote too, talking about, being very angry, but also being very hopeful for what we can achieve moving forward and for how we can change moving forward, because we have to, right? We have to have some hope. With your involvement with the organization Stop Asian Hate and the work that you've been doing there, is there anything that we should know that's happening right now where people can play an active part?
Just not to put your blinders on. Just be aware, give a shit, look outside your bubble and see what's happening to other people of color. Because it goes, and there's a lot of tension. There's a lot of tension between the African American and Asian American communities. There's a lot of misinformation and a lot of stereotypes being thrown at both parties. There's a lot of healing that needs to be done. And so I just urge everyone to go outside your bubble. It's not about just Stop Asian or PI hate. It's about stop hate in general. Like we need to realize we're all different. Everybody. I mean, I'm different from another Korean American. We're all different. It's just maddening to me that we continue to go one step forward and two steps back. There's nothing fun about, in my lifetime, watching things go backwards. Progress is the only way. Obviously my political leanings are extremely left, and I'm proud to carry that flag because that's who I am. I feel like we have to, if we go backwards, it doesn't do any good for us. We have to go forward and accept change. It can't be the way it was. I'm sure life was a lot more simpler in 1930, but we're not in 1930. This is the reality. Everything changes and we have to move with the changes and accept that people are different.
Absolutely. And embrace it, accept it, embrace it, and, celebrate the differences that we have.
Yeah. Celebrate diversity is a great slogan. And that's what is so good about the human being. And I feel like there are so many good people out there that sometimes that negativity really breaks you down. Mm-hmm. And so I love that slogan, celebrate diversity, because it brings some kind of joy to me when I see that.
Mhm.
And I know that there are good people out there that are celebrating the differences instead of rewinding. They are going forward. But to like just to conclude that idea of what can you do for the Stop API Hate movement? I mean, there's nothing you can do. Like monetarily, it's like I don't feel like you can't just keep giving money to certain organizations. Just support a friend or go to a meeting. Vol- the big thing is volunteer. It doesn't have to be our movement. It could be any movement. But instead of using your keyboard warrior finger, it's not doing anything. Go out there and physically be part of the movement, whether it's being in a soup kitchen or whether it's like helping the elderly, do something other than just complain. That's what you can do.
Absolutely. We've been seeing a lot of the different movements now talking about saying, if you believe in this, show up. You have to show up and you have to be the person that comes and fights. And you're right, the keyboard warrior thing is just not working. We can share our opinion till the end of time, and it doesn't make much of a difference unless you show up and do the
Yeah, yeah, the social media stuff is, man, that stuff is maddening.
it is.
You're not winning. You're not winning. You don't win
No, it is
because
that's
yeah, if someone made a grammatical error, you didn't win. You
no,
haven't changed their mind.
no, that's crazy. Now, for those of us who are educators or educator adjacent in this community, do you have any advice for us for how we can help kids who might be struggling, whether it be identity issues or pressures to be and do in a certain way, or who might be struggling with the racism that they're encountering in or outside of school right now? How might we rally to help those kids, and how can we best support them?
Yeah, if we're talking like the Asian American community, students, teenagers, the educators need to just be aware that they can't turn to their parents in most cases. It's not something they're comfortable with. And so there has to be some kind of therapy at these schools on a much larger level. There just needs to be an opening and a welcoming, safe place for kids to go and talk about the issues that they're dealing with. And it goes so above and beyond just Asian Americans. This holds true for anybody who has a pulse, especially young kids, teenagers. I don't wish that on anybody to have to, just being a teenager is tough. So we have to just support the educators, and those are the real heroes, the teachers, the therapists. I talk about it with my wife all the time. I can't imagine being a teenager in present day 2023. It's got to be so tough.
It must be. I agree. Is that they deal with things that I never would have thought of as a teenager or as somebody navigating high school. I think, boy, I'm glad this didn't exist when I was there. But it's tense. And especially now as we're talking about celebrating diversity and we're talking about, belongingness and the mental health of these kids, we have another group of people in society who are trying to take the books out of classrooms and trying to put, educator gags or bans on topics that they're not comfortable with because it's a difference. How do you think that might impact these kids moving forward?
I think it's going to backfire on the extremists. Kid, people got to give kids a little more credit than they are giving them. It's not going to go over well. They don't like to be censored. So I, it's that stuff pisses me off to the nth degree. It's going to backfire, and they'll see. It's the young people need to be given more credit, and they are the future. And the more they piss off the young people, the more they're gonna see, it's gonna affect them. And where does it affect people? In the pocketbooks, where they're voted out of office, they
Mhm.
lose their power. Money and power, it all goes hand in hand. So when that power is stripped from them, they're going to see how the young people can get together and really start a revolution.
We're seeing some fantastic protests already. Kids reacting to book bans or reacting to educator gags on curriculum and restrictive policies. We're seeing some recently in Florida. I'm seeing some here in Pennsylvania in local communities. So the kids are rising up and they're clapping back at their administrators and their boards. And we're talking not just college. So they're standing up. And
Yeah.
I believe you're right. There's going to be a backlash, especially in politics, where the tide will change because as much as we don't appreciate being censored, boy, the kids don't want to hear it.
Those 14-year-olds who miss the voting age, who are going to be 18. And then, I mean, it's millions of people who are going to be. So we have to engage young people to want to vote. And so the old hats are going to die off. And so the young people get to that voting age, it's just going to be more power in this movement to progress. It's kind of morbid to say that, but I think it's true. Like they're gonna die off, and this movement is going to only strengthen.
Right. So
At
there's,
least I hope.
but
Yeah.
I do think Gen Z is very impressive with the way they handle their activism. It's a smart activism that maybe the millennials missed, where they don't jump the shark. They don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, to throw out a couple of metaphors there, but they're smart. They listen, and yet they have things that they say, no, nothing but this. And we need to get to this. And this is my demand. And I expect this from you. I'll listen to you. I hear you. And this is why you need to change. And they keep pushing. And if you do something wrong, they call you on it. At the same time, they will offer you forgiveness if you change. So they have a very smart activism about them that's refreshing. And it's something that I think, what I'm seeing can make real progress as they start to come of age and, leave their colleges and get into this workforce and into those political spaces that we need people to leave so that they can start to make a real difference. So I'm excited about that. So if we wanted to listen to a couple of ska or punk bands that would motivate us to do something, who do you suggest?
I suggest me. I mean, I've always been political, but the music I've written has all been just come from a place of anger, and it's therapeutic for me. So the last two records I've put out, it's under the name the Bruce Lee Band. One record is called Division in the Heartland, and the last record is called One Step Forward, Two Steps Back. And it's all politically motivated. I'd love for people to hear it and just hear what my voice has to say. And it comes from a place of anger, but also in hopes of healing through this music.
The Bruce Lee Band. That's great. That's great. I did check out some Skankin Pickle, but I haven't listened to Bruce Lee Band yet. So that'll be next on my
Skankin Pickle is very different because it was a collective. So I had to share songwriting with other people. But with my own stuff, I get to say and do what I want.
That's amazing.
There's no compromise.
And that's when you can really shine, right?
Exactly.
So is there anything that I haven't asked you that you'd like to share with the educator community or with anybody who's interested in activism in this space?
Nothing off the top of my head. I think a main thing I'm very concerned about is the tension between the African American and Asian American communities. And I want people to understand that a lot of it stems from fear of what we don't know. And so a lot of my activism right now is pushing for understanding and healing within the two communities. And that a lot of this, we're going on, decades since the LA riots. We've been dealing with kind of the fear. A lot of the older generation, especially in the Asian American community, I feel a lot of the older generation have a lot of fear and unknowing, and the education is just not there. So I just want people to know that education has to be first and foremost if we're going to get out of this, and to stay away from that fear, the fake fear that people keep putting in our minds of visuals. And it's something that I am worried about, and it affects me. That's my closing statement.
There you go. Well, thank you so much for spending the time with me here today and talking through this with me. This was a great conversation.